Happy Monday and happy Bracketology. We're trying something new here at the association, something that's hopefully is fun and engaging over the next hour or so. So if you're a basketball junkie like I am, and if you are anything like me, you watched some basketball yesterday, you watched the selection show yesterday evening, and then immediately after the last team was announced, you went and you print off one of the brackets and you started going through it. And maybe some of you are still waiting, because I know the NCAA is doing it a little bit different this year, where the first games are going to be pushed back now till Thursday because of COVID protocols in the bubble and so forth. But we thought it would be fun to kind of do one of two things. And we'll do this as I introduce our guests, but we're going to take a look at what makes a person pick a particular team. We'll talk about some of the reasons why, both from the brain aspect of it, of a selection, and the X and O's aspect of making a selection. So with that, pull out your bracket if you have one. Just sit back and enjoy some of the conversation. We have Caleb Hale, who's Director of Alumni Communications. You're not going to see his face, but he is behind the scenes making this happen. He is going to be watching for the chat line to see if any particular questions come in, and we'll do our best to get to those. And Caleb may just pop in and ask a question. But we want to be cognizant of everybody's time. Many of you are doing this over a lunchtime, but we'll go through as much as we can, hopefully provide some information, provide some facts, but then hopefully have a little bit of fun. So with us, you're looking at our screen. Up above, I'm going to start with Dr. Michael Hyland. And Dr. Hyland, I may get this wrong, but I believe neuroscience psychologist. Mm-hmm. And also program director for the brain and cognitive sciences here at SIU. I nailed that one. And also down here at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a very familiar face and maybe an even more familiar voice, Mike Trude, who is one of a number of voices of Saluki sports. And in particular, why Mike's here today is he is the color guy for our men's basketball team. So Mike, Dr. Hyland, welcome. And for those of you who are sports enthusiasts, as I am, there's this probably a very familiar show that just went off the air a year or two ago called Mike and Mike. So this is SIU's version of Mike and Mike in Bracketology. So both of you, welcome. So I'm going to be that fan that wants to ask all the questions about, Dr. Hyland, why did I pick such a team? And Mike, am I crazy from an X and O standpoint of why I picked them? And maybe that'll help some of our audience. But Dr. Hyland, let's start with you. Just paint us a picture of what goes through a person's brain when they're actually looking at the brackets and why they picked a particular team.
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think it really kind of comes down to a couple different things. First of all, like you've described yourself as a self-described basketball junkie. Myself, I have followed a game or two here or there. So I'm certainly no expert when it comes to March Madness. But I think a lot of this comes down to things like a person's experience with a particular team or familiarity with a particular team. We tend to gravitate towards things that are more familiar or more reliable to us. So perhaps if you've been following this for a few years, you might tend to pick teams that are more sure winners, or more set up to kind of win. If you really kind of have kind of the inside information, if you will, you might know about things like injuries or new players. So I think it really, depends upon the experience level, if you will, of the chooser. I mean, regardless, in the brain, if we're kind of taking this from the brain aspect of things, your prefrontal cortex is largely going to be going kind of crazy here in terms of making these decisions, going with what might be a sure bet or not be a sure bet, or on the newbie like me, it might be like, well, I feel like this is more of something based upon what little bit I know about the wins versus the losses or rankings in their respective divisions. So I guess in a nutshell, a lot of it comes down to an interaction between the brain and the experiences that we have. As I've told a few people this kind of anecdotal, tale. I have a friend who is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan and grew up here in Southern Illinois, and I asked him, like, the Steelers, why would you ever pick a team? I mean, you're from Illinois. You've even asked him, like, did you live in Pittsburgh? And he's like, no. And he said, really, it came down to him growing up watching games with his dad, and actually his dad was an avid Steelers fan back in the day, I guess, when they were really doing very well and really kind of winning. And he said that's a lot of times how people even sometimes pick teams, even if they're not from the area. They'll kind of go with the top, the top dogs, if you will, in a given moment. And I think that kind of then translates out to your kids or family members that maybe you share these kind of moments with. So, some of this might come down to like a team that you've just been following and you really like, but even in something like a bracket where you're not necessarily following all these teams, a lot of it can come down to things like familiarity, things like following stats, and our brains tend to love patterns. So if we tend to see a pattern with a particular team, we might be gravitated towards that. And that's really what our prefrontal cortex and the like is just kind of loving at this moment. So, with these decisions that we're kind of bombarded with, and there might even be a little bit of a reinforcing effect. So you get other areas of the brain that are kind of involved in the reinforcing properties of this, going, man, I was right this time. I think I'm going to go with that in the future, or go with that in going forward. So that's kind of the gist of it.
Hey, Jeff, you are muted at a moment.
I shared with you a story as we were kind of preparing for this, that I came from Pittsburgh, so I can't even come to Carbondale and get away from the Steelers story. So, and all of you Steeler fans out there, I mean no offense, but coming from Southern Ohio, I just had to get that in. But Dr. Hyland, just one more follow-up to that, the brain. So that was good information. I got that, but how are the brain and the heart work together? Because as I was going through this, there was a lot of heart that maybe was going to my brain versus the brain going to my heart.
Well, it's really, the brain is the master organ, if you will, of this. So I think that feeling we get, that we ascribe to kind of that emotional sense, comes from maybe sympathetic response, that excitement, that enjoyment that you feel like, oh man, that was really a cool story, or oh man, that was a really cool game to kind of watch. So it's that sympathetic activation, which is, we always call fight or flight, but we got to remember that excitement produces a lot of those same things: increased heart rate, sweating. That's actually why lie detectors don't detect lies. They just detect activation of sympathetic activity in the body. So the brain, controls that through a number of different areas. the hypothalamus, do not just bombard people with terminologies here, but the hypothalamus is one of these centers. The amygdala, which we like to call the emotion center of the brain, which we don't want to pinpoint. It'd be like the old phrenology folks and start saying this is the soul root area. But these are areas though that are affiliated with that emotional component that we have. So you hear a story, like my Steelers anecdotal tale. I told my buddy about this afterwards, and he got a good laugh out of it. He's a very avid football fan in general, which is why he said a lot of times people pick these things based upon their experiences and who might be winning at a current moment. But yeah, a lot of it comes down to that brain kind of controlling that sympathetic response a little bit.
All right, Mike, bring us here to reality here. So X and O's. So I'm sure you've looked at the bracket. At the end of this, we're all going to release our final four, but what goes through your head as far as like just really looking at X's and O's of the teams that were selected?
Right. Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the Mike and Mike aspect, and the running joke for all of the years that Mike and Mike did their brackets together is Mike Greenberg, who is the non-athletic, non-football player, maybe brains of the outfit, would do his tournament sheet of integrity. He would fill out only one bracket per year, where Mike Golick would do 5 or 6 because of his brain, because of his heart, because of his loyalties. He wanted to make sure that he had all of his bases covered in his 4 or 5 different brackets. So if you are literally just doing one bracket sheet and you want to win your office pool, you want to win the ESPN bracket, you want to win whatever bracket contest you are entering, sometimes going with your heart is not always the best way to go, because your heart may tell you that Hartford is where you grew up and you went to college there and they're in the tournament for the first time ever. So just because of your heart, you're picking them to get to the Sweet 16 to give you more points along the way. You have to realize that they are taking on a number 1 seed in Baylor in their very first game and are likely to be almost eliminated already by halftime. So it's a different thing to do. So if you are doing the one sheet of integrity, which is the only sheet you are going to do, and you really want to win your pool, then you have to use your brain and you have to use the statistics and analytics and years in the tournament and all those things put together to try to come up with your solutions to make those original picks. And also, for those doing their polls, they may want to wait until Wednesday actually to do their polls, because of COVID this year and because of the issues that have already come into play with Duke and Kansas and teams like that in their tournament situations. The entire field of teams that has been invited have until Tuesday night to be able to pass all of the protocol that has been set up by the NCAA in order to get to Indianapolis and actually compete in the tournament, whether it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whenever they get those first round games set up. And teams can still bow out Tuesday and be replaced in the field by an alternate school, whether it's a team from the last 4 out of the tournament, which would be Louisville, Colorado State, St. Louis, and Mississippi, or if they were a conference champion, they could be replaced by the team that finished second in their conference championship game. So they may want to wait until Wednesday to actually fill out the brackets, because there were still some teams that were trying to get through protocol, Kansas being one of them. Kansas's Bill Self spoke last night and said that they hope to be able to have their entire team in Indianapolis by Friday in order to play Saturday, which would not give them even a chance to practice as a full unit on Friday in anticipation of that Saturday game. So I think at this stage, again, depending on how you are doing your bracket/brackets, heart versus head comes into the conversation, and it's really hard to go against Gonzaga.
Well, speaking of, that's a great segue into maybe our first, if folks are following along, we're looking at the Gonzaga part of the bracket, which is the West region. I'm looking at Gonzaga. I'm going chalk here, but I don't want to leave out the first four in here. So if you look at the bottom of the bracket, you've got Norfolk State versus Appalachian State. You've got Mount St. Mary's versus Texas Southern, Wichita State and Drake, Michigan State and UCLA. Any one of those games, let me ask a question from the brain and the X and O's. Any one team or two teams there that stand out that just like might be a sleeper going into that next round?
For me, when I looked at these, I kind of looked, again on the notion that, well, these are equally ranked teams, so it's going to go a lot to my own experience and familiarity in picking who I would pick. I've for instance, like Wichita State and Drake, I leaned more towards Drake, probably because I've heard more about Drake, in recent years and that, or UCLA. I'll say part of that's even a little bit. I have a lot of colleagues that do neuroscience work there, so there's like these non-logical kind of things that go to familiarity that I think really kind of emphasize how our brain operates in general and why sometimes we make probably not the best decisions with respect to this, because if we don't have all the information in front of us, all the logical data that should be there to kind of guide us, we kind of then rely upon either anecdotal information or sources of familiarity to guide that decision making, which is why a lot of people, I've always heard people say, like, economists are very, they think that human beings act rationally or make decisions in a rational manner, but psychologists, and by extension neuroscientists, because many of us are psychologists in some of our training, know that human beings do not make rational decisions a lot of times. I'm sure someone who is better informed or followed things a lot better than I have would be able to provide a little bit more insight on who the better picks would be in these first four.
So Mike, tell us who are you picking in those first four games?
Well, it's interesting because you think college basketball, you think Blue Bloods, you think Michigan State, you think UCLA, you think Duke and Arizona and Louisville and Notre Dame and Indiana. And those last four teams that I talked about aren't even in the tournament this year.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes picking these first and second round games a little bit more difficult, because usually you would go Duke, chalk, let's go with Duke. Kentucky, they're going to win at least till the Sweet 16. Not the case this year. And then when you have Blue Bloods like Michigan State and UCLA playing a game to get into the field of 64, that makes it that much more interesting. The Big Ten, I think, has been the most dominant conference this year. Michigan State has beaten 3 of the top 4 number 1 seeds this year and still is playing a game to get into the tournament. But they had a really rough stretch when they were going through their COVID situation, and then came back and had to play 3 straight road games to start their second season, so to speak, and had a rough go, but then finished extremely strong. And so I like Michigan State over UCLA in that play-in round. And then Wichita Drake, this is where I go with familiarity. Now, I watched Wichita State in their quarterfinal and semifinal rounds this weekend, and it's basically the same Wichita State team that I saw back in January. They're a streaky team. They play defense really well, but they're not very consistent on offense, where Drake from the Missouri Valley Conference, which is obviously our conference that SIU plays in, Drake beat Loyola, which is one of only, a couple losses for the Ramblers this year. Drake has been consistent all year. They lost their top 2 players late in the season, but one of them might be able to come back for this play-in game and give them a real boost. And I like Drake because Drake can score. One thing that Drake has always been able to do is score the basketball, and you have to have more points than your opponent to win a game. And Wichita State showed in both of the semifinal or in the quarterfinal and semifinal games that they played just well enough to win. They were the top seed in their conference. They did not play like a top seeded team. So I like Drake and I like Michigan State to advance into their games. And then the Norfolk State, Appalachian State, it's the first bid for App State. I like Norfolk State to win that one. And those are the only real key ones I see in that round.
Well, Dr. Hyland, I've already am applying your logic because I picked Drake only because we are in the Missouri Valley Conference, so I just went with them no matter what. And then I picked Michigan State just because I would not want to play this team at all. I think they're hot. And I did go with App State, and then just to round out, I went with Texas Southern. So those are my 4 going into it. But just being cognizant of time here, let's for the folks watching, we'll try to get through the first round because then everything else is a crapshoot from that point on, and then we'll talk about our final 4 before we close out for the afternoon. But I'm going to make a strong assumption that the 3 of us are going with Gonzaga.
Actually, I went with App State because of their ranking. I don't know. Sometimes I have to go for that underdog, the Cinderella story. This is why I'm not a gambler though, at the same time, because I know that the odds are stacked against. But it's nice sometimes to see that Cinderella story come to play. So,
well, I guess you're in it to win it because we're going to talk about upsets from both of you. Get your takes on upsets. But Mike, I'm assuming you're going Gonzaga.
Yes.
Oklahoma, Missouri. So you got an 8-9 seed. These games are always a pick 'em. So Mike, I'm going to start with you. Oklahoma, Missouri.
I think both of them got seeded horribly. I thought Oklahoma should have been a 5 or a 6, and Missouri should have been a 5 or a 6 as well. They're both really good, but I think I'm going to go with Oklahoma. Had a better run midway through the year. Mizzou has beaten Illinois, but that was when Illinois hadn't really found itself yet. Missouri is a team that on any given day can play with anybody in the country without question, but I just don't think they have enough offense to beat Oklahoma.
Doctor?
Oh, I feel like I'm being the antithesis here, like the antagonizer. I went with Missouri. Just again, going to go into that local. And I've always kind of steered away from Oklahoma team wise, just because of friends, kind of maybe friends pointing me in the opposite direction.
Okay, well, I went with Oklahoma, but we'll keep going. Now, these 5-12 matchups, I think, Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but historically, throughout the NCAA tournament, always seem to be some of the most talked about games. And I can't remember, the year that Loyola and Butler and where they were ranked, but in previous tournaments, but they weren't 1 seeds. But this 5-12 matchup of Creighton and UC Santa Barbara, those games to me, and I've been doing these tournaments every year, is the one that I always stumble on. So thoughts on Creighton and UC?
Yeah, the 5-12 matchup, the 12 seed has a 50-90 record in the 5-12 matchup. So the 12s win it less than half the time, but that's more than any other higher seeded team or lower seeded. 13 through 16 have not come close to winning 50 times against their matchup opponent. So this is one where I like the 12 seed. I like UC Santa Barbara. They will play some defense on you. And if they get to play their style of game, the final score, may not end up being more than 120 points, where Creighton comes in averaging close to 85, 90 points a game. So it's a battle of styles. Creighton's without its head coach right now because he was suspended due to his remarks that he made a couple of weeks ago. They got hammered by Georgetown in the in their tournament. So I like the way UC Santa Barbara is playing right now.
So Dr. Hyland, you've heard all of Mike's. He's given you all the brain, the statistics, and X and O's. I mean, we can argue, the two teams, but so you look at a 5-seeded versus a 12 seed. You listen to what Mike, all the data that he just spit out. Now, what is my brain doing?
Well, I think at that point, when you start getting actual data, it's almost like, again, the prefrontal cortex is guiding a lot of this. It might even be telling like that emotional center, hey, this is a little bit, more solid information. Because as I'm listening to Mike, I'm like, yeah, maybe I should go with a more reliable pick based upon the actual facts, kind of listening to the expert. And that's actually what we hope we do in any kind of informed decision. Just this bracket kind of being a microcosm of what we do every day when we make decisions. We hope that our prefrontal cortex is guided by the best information possible, and kind of suppressing that, like, well, I kind of had my gut feeling or emotional feeling here that I like this team because of whatever factor you want to pick that's more tethered to some sort of response or reflex. So like I said, it's almost like I don't want to say I could feel my prefrontal, like I could feel my, but in a way it's like my prefrontal cortex is really probably working right now to think, hey, Mike knows here a lot more. If I was a betting man, I'd probably go on some of these stats here, some of the things he was mentioning about coaches and about players, getting brought in or taken out, or, what have you, that those are really significant factors that are going to drive a game. And, again, your brain tells you, like, go with that thing, ignore those silly patterns, ignore those kind of that kind of silly misinformation, and go with the reliable source, so to speak.
So who did you pick in this game?
Honestly, that one with Creighton, I went with them just because they're a higher seed. But hearing some of the things about what you're saying about Santa Barbara, these are valid points. So it's maybe not just ranking alone that we should pay attention to, but what factors that are kind of contributing maybe to this.
So if you don't mind, we're 30 minutes in, so I'm just gonna ask you real quick, and then I'm gonna stop at a couple of things, points I'd like to make. So Virginia, Ohio, I have UVA. What say both of you?
I say Virginia, but just to throw this out there, the last time Ohio was in the tournament, they were a 13 seed and they went all the way to the Sweet 16, and they played a first round game against a team just like Virginia. Not as good as Virginia currently, but Ohio has the ability, but I like Virginia.
You had to go there, Mike. How about you, Dr. Hyland?
I actually went with Ohio
my
because
goodness.
because of some of the historical things that Mike is mentioning. And I have heard, again, my limited familiarity. I'm like, I'm a little surprised to kind of see them ranked where they are. So I think maybe they can be the upset here.
All right, I want to quickly move down to Iowa Grand Canyon, but USC, the USC game, I picked USC.
Okay.
You guys?
This is where I go with my heart, and I'm going to pick Drake.
Okay.
I think we've got an agreement here for once. I went with Drake myself.
All
with
right.
my heart.
Kansas, East Washington. I went with Kansas.
KU.
Yep.
Kansas here.
Oregon, VCU.
I'm going with Dana Altman in Oregon just because familiarity with the program, and he always gets his team ready for tournaments.
Dr. Hyland.
VCU, just because I got some colleagues that work there. I gotta show some love for some. I know they're not playing, but
So let's talk about the 2 versus the 15, and Mike, maybe this might be another seedings of games that people talk about, the 2 and the 15. I mean, we all like the Cinderella story with a 1 and a 16, but the 2 and 15, that could happen.
It could. It's happened 8 times.
8 times.
They're 8 and 132. So the odds are minuscule. And as much as I don't like their coach Frischella at Iowa, the Hawkeyes should breeze in this game.
I would agree. Dr. Hyland?
I would too. I mean,
All
I'm
right.
familiar enough with the Hawkeyes to know.
Okay. So now we're going to jump down into the East bracket. So we've got Michigan as the number 1 seed. Let's focus on that game real quick. I got Michigan, but okay.
That's
all
what
right.
I had.
Yeah,
All right.
I don't think Texas Southern or Mount St. Mary's can touch them.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're going into, which I think is going to be a better game than maybe some people think, maybe not, but LSU, the Bonnies of St. Bonaventure. I have LSU, but I had to think long and hard about this one. My brain was hurting by the time I got through this one. So, Dr. Hyland, why don't you start us with this one?
Mine went with LSU because I've got a really close dear friend of mine who'd probably be upset with me if I didn't pick LSU. That's her alma mater, so she's got a lot of loyalty there. So I got to share it.
Mike?
8-9s are always a coin toss, really, and this one is the same. St. Bonaventure will guard you all day long, but so will LSU. LSU got to the championship game of their tournament before losing. I'm going to go with LSU.
Gotcha. Now, this is one that on my sheet that I highlighted that I wanted to talk about. So maybe we'll breeze through some of these other ones, but the Colorado-Georgetown game, with Georgetown just annihilating Creighton in the tournament. I'm anxious to hear the logic behind the X and O choice, but also the brain choice here between this game. So, Mike, I'll start with you on this one.
Okay, well, Georgetown red hot, obviously. When you think of Creighton and you think of Creighton shooting threes, Georgetown actually shoots 3-pointers better than Creighton. They're the number 1 team in their conference for 3-pointers. They had a lull in the middle of the season where they struggled mightily, but they have really come together about 2 weeks before their tournament, and they breezed through the tournament. Colorado is an outstanding team as well. I just think Georgetown is in the right place, right time, great seed, and will win that game in advance.
Dr. Hyland.
Well, my dad's from Colorado, and it's a beautiful state. So again, going with something that's probably not the most logical, not data driven. So don't be taking it on a bet on anything data wise here. But I went with Colorado myself.
All right, quickly moving along, the Florida State game. I went chalk here, but,
Yep.
okay, Dr. Hyland.
Yeah,
Okay, all
same
right.
thing.
This one is one that I wanted to spend some time talking about based on our final our first four picks. I don't know when you're looking at Michigan State, UCLA versus BYU, this might be one that is worth talking about. So, Dr. Hyland, let's start with you.
I probably, it's because I'm just trying to keep consistent, but I went with you at UCLA. That was a tough one because I've heard of Brigham Young being a really good team. So I had to pause, on that one, but I felt like I needed to be consistent. I don't know why, but that's why I went with UCLA.
Mike?
I'm going to go with Michigan State over BYU. BYU played Gonzaga as tough as anybody did this year, yet still didn't really come close to beating them. Played them well in the championship game, but Gonzaga, became Gonzaga again and ended up winning it pretty handily. I just think Michigan State right now is a team I would not want to play.
Yeah, I agree with you. I went with Michigan State as well. So Texas and Abilene Christian. I went chalk here with Texas.
Yep. Texas.
This next game could be an interesting one. I bet there'll be some split decisions over this one with Yukon and Maryland. I chose Maryland, but again, my rationale was based on conference strength. I know Yukon is a great team, but Mike, your thoughts on this one?
I'm going to go with Yukon on this one just because the defense that they can play. And so they can keep a game at their pace. And Maryland is a team that likes to get up and down a little bit, likes to score. But I think Yukon does struggle a little bit on the offensive end, but I think they can do enough defensively to maintain and win.
Dr. Hyland.
Yeah, I went Yukon again. A lot of the same, similar reasons Mike was saying, and just kind of historically where they've stood. Well,
the last one and that will take care of this side of the bracket is you got Alabama, Iona. Iona's got a great story. You look at what Coach Pitino's done. I mean, pretty impressive, but I don't know that they had the firepower to stay up with Alabama. But Mike, maybe you can tell me I'm wrong.
I mean, I agree with you. Iona is a good team. They are not near the caliber of Alabama, who literally has a chance to make it to the Final Four. So I think Alabama will blow out Iona and send Coach Pitino back to summer.
Dr. Hyland, you?
Yeah, I mean, I get the Alabama. I put down Iona just because I want to root for the underdog sometimes. I'm probably just hoping too much for that Cinderella story, but I don't disagree with Alabama.
Okay, so moving over to the South, we're starting off with Baylor and Hartford. So I went with Baylor on this one, but Dr. Hyland, okay.
Same thing, went Baylor.
All right. Here again, an 8-9 matchup. You got Carolina and you've got Wisconsin. This to me was another coin flip, Mike, but I went with Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's again, two great programs. Wisconsin actually played the 6th toughest schedule in the country, and that's why they're 17-12. North Carolina playing well, but Florida State did enough in the ACC championship game to win it outright. I'm going to go with defense again in this one. I think defense wins early games in the tournament, and I think Wisconsin is better defensively than North Carolina.
Dr. Hyland.
I'm in agreement there.
Gotcha. Here you go again. You got another 5-12 matchup, Villanova and Winthrop. Dr. Hyland, where did you stand with this one?
I went with Winthrop at this point. Sometimes I don't know why I'm drawn to those long long shots, but I just went with Winthrop. Just spoke to me, I guess.
Mike?
I agree with the doc. Villanova is playing without its best guard, Colin Gillespie. He's out of the tournament. Villanova is not anywhere near the team that they are with him in the lineup. Winthrop is 23-1. Don't let the fact that they play in a small school conference sway you any. This is a very, very good basketball team, and Winthrop can win this game.
Yeah, I went with Nova, but again, I think Winthrop can do this, and that's going to be one of those games I hope we get to see. That's going to be that'd be a good game. So we got Purdue and North Texas next. Dr. Hyland, where did you stand with this one?
I went Purdue, just because the ranking and just, kind of a great history with respect to that, that team.
Mike?
Got to go with my heart, Matt Painter. My sister graduated from Purdue. That was the very first team that I followed when I was a kid because of my sister's allegiance at the school. And I'm talking back when Rick Mount was a guard for Purdue. Watched all their games on television. So I'm a big Purdue fan and just think they'll do well.
Good. So I heard a lot of talk about this next game, Texas Tech and Utah State. And while the seedings are interesting, I had to really think long and hard about this one. Mike, educate me on Texas Tech and Utah State.
Texas Tech is maybe the second best defensive team in the Big 12 and will just guard you from the get-go. Played extremely well against Oklahoma State, played extremely well against Baylor, had the ability to actually win those games if they could come up with a little more offense. Utah State likes to score. So again, in this situation, I go with the defense because the game has a tendency to come back down to their level, and maybe the shot clock becomes a factor where Utah State doesn't mind shooting, first good shot they see. I'm going to go chalk here with Texas Tech.
Same here.
I'm in agreement. Arkansas and Colgate. And I know this should be a track meet.
Yeah, there may be 250 points scored in this one.
Exactly. So, Dr. Hyland, did anything?
I just was drawn more towards Arkansas at this point, over the two. Just kind of went with the better ranked.
I totally agree. I think Arkansas will outscore Colgate.
I think this could be a game that I have circled that could just throw people's brackets off. I mean, because it is a pick 'em, but you think of Colgate and it's not, Arkansas is in the SEC. They got a big conference there, but Colgate, they can do this. So that could be one that could be a spoiler for somebody's bracket going forward. Moving forward, we got Florida and Virginia Tech.
I think Florida should win the game.
I would agree. I mean, this was definitely a toss-up with me. I put Virginia Tech down, but I mean, I could really have gone either way with this one.
All right, Mike, be nice to me on this one. I think most people who know me know that I am from Ohio, so I did go to Ohio State. So you got Ohio State and Oral Roberts.
No question about this one. Ohio State will win this game, whether Jack Young is available or not with his concussion protocol. They showed yesterday that they are extremely, in fact, the last 2 days, they're extremely good when he doesn't play. They're even better if he can play. So Ohio State in a breeze.
I'm with you there.
All right. Ironically enough, that leads us right into the last bracket, which is the Midwest. And, you talked about the Ohio State Illinois game. Let's get right into the Illinois Drexel game.
The Drexel Dragons are going down big time. U of I is playing. I am not, again, I'm a fan of the Big Ten. I'm not necessarily a fan of our sister school up north. So I go Illinois because they're the much better team.
Same. I mean, you can't.
Okay. All right. Okay. Of all the games that are on here, I have double asterisks besides this next one. I think this could be one of the best games on TV when you're looking at Loyola and Georgia Tech. And I've watched them both play. Mike, I couldn't wait to hear what you thought about this game.
Yeah, it's a shame that it's a first rounder and not maybe a Sweet 16.
Exactly.
I think Georgia Tech got a bad seed. I think they're a much better seed than a 9. I think Loyola is a better seed than an 8. I think they both could have been 5s and 6s with the way they played this year. Obviously, the Valley doesn't have quite the prestige as the ACC does, but Loyola is the best defensive team in the NCAA. You're lucky to score 60 points against them. And Georgia Tech is one of those teams that will grind it out with you as well. Loyola's got size. They've got experience. They've got the defense. They can score when they want to score. They have guys who can score off the dribble. Georgia Tech has exactly the same. Georgia Tech's a little bit taller than Loyola is. So rebounding could be a big issue. On this one, I'm going with Loyola in a squeaker. Really, maybe the best game of the first round.
Dr. Hyland.
I went with the same. I went with Loyola.
Well, I was the one that was different, so I went with Georgia Tech, and it was
not a bad pick.
It was that grinding play that I watched them in the tournament. It impressed me, and no knock against Loyola because I think both of them are just great teams. Tennessee, Oregon State.
When Tennessee is on, they could get to the Final Four. They just have to be consistent. I think this is one of those 5-12 matchups, and the Pac-12 doesn't get a lot of respect in the tournament, even though they got some teams in. I mean, they got 5 teams in the tournament, but I think I'm going to go with Tennessee.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. So we're looking at Oklahoma State, Liberty.
I'm going Oklahoma State. I like Liberty, but Oklahoma State.
I went Oklahoma in this one.
Okay, this next game I struggled with again. San Diego State and Syracuse. Dr. Hyland, any insight on this one from you?
I just leaned more towards the familiarity effect here with Syracuse and hearing more about them than San Diego State kind of historically. So I went with Syracuse in this one, even though they're lower ranked.
Mike?
This is the 35th tournament for Jim Boeheim. Is that crazy?
Yes.
For Syracuse. But San Diego State is a really, really good team. And I think they've got enough to beat the Orange.
Well, no disrespect to the coach, but I went with San Diego State. I think this might be their year at least to move forward. So I chose them as well. So WVU and Morehead State. Mike?
My heart wants to go with Morehead State because of the conference they're in. They're in the Ohio Valley. They beat Belmont. Morehead State had a great year. I think it's been 10 years since they've been in the tournament. But West Virginia competes and competes and competes. And I think their zone that they play will give Morehead State all kinds of issues, and West Virginia will win.
I'm in agreement. I mean, I've had some familiarity with Morehead, and they sound like a great team, but I went with West Virginia just because, again, their ranking is better. So I pulled with them.
All right. So last 2 games here, we got Clemson versus Rutgers. Dr. Hyland, anything that stood out for you on this one?
They're both from what I understand pretty good. And their rankings are pretty close there. I mean, I went with Rutgers. I just kind of went a little bit gut here. So,
Mike?
I'm going to stick with the Big Ten here as well. Rutgers played some of the top teams in the Big Ten pretty strong early on. Again, they had a lull in the Big Ten season, but this is a team that can score, it can defend, they've got guards, and you can win with guards in the NCAA tournament. And I think they're just going to be a little bit better than Clemson.
Okay, I went with Rutgers as well. So last game is 2 seed Houston versus a 16 seed in Cleveland State. Mike, why don't you start?
Yeah, Cleveland State, it's been nice that you got in, but I'm sorry, you're facing one of the top 5 teams in the country, and Houston may beat them by 35.
Dr. Hyland.
I spent some time in a postdoctoral fellowship in Houston, and you hear about them all the time down there. So I went with Houston. I mean, it just really stand out as a team. Okay,
I did too. So I'm looking at my clock, and we got about 10 minutes left, and we flew through this. It's the old saying, time flies when you're having fun. So this was great. But before we pick our final 4, I want to make an observation. But I'm stalling for both of you here. But my question to both of you is going to be, okay, so we did the first round. Is there any maybe 1 or 2 matchups before we get to the final 4 that really you would either like to see, you think would be intriguing? So there's my I'll call it a fastball, not a softball. So think about that. But my observation through this 50 minutes that we've been together is, Dr. Hyland, you are a part of this as allowing us a little inside knowledge of the brain and how the brain works, and what are some of the factors that make us think in decision making like this. Mm-hmm. And Mike, you did exactly what I had hoped and talked about. You talked about some of the X and O's and conference play and injuries and some of the X and O factors that go into a decision making. And both of you were true to form. And it was funny to watch and listen to both of you as you're giving your analysis of why. Because Dr. Hyland, you did apply all of your thinking, all the things that you said. So you did, but you did get into the heart, and you actually did pick out some of the X and O strategies behind some of your choices. And Mike, you did the same thing. I mean, I know you used your brain the entire time, but I mean, it was interesting to hear how you made a final decision on picking a team. So I applaud both of you for sticking to your guns and playing nice in the sandbox for this session here. But Dr. Hyland, so back to my question here. Going forward, is there a matchup either from a scientific aspect or just an X and O aspect that you would really like to see play out over the course of this tournament?
I'm just hearing all the buzz about this Baylor Hartford matchup. I mean, I don't know, or just watching Baylor play. I've lived down in Texas for a bit, so I'm pretty aware that they have a good basketball team, and they have a great football team as well. I'm kind of excited to see how far they go in all of this. I'm gonna be just because I'm from Illinois originally, and I've got that loyalty there to the Midwest. I'm gonna be, of course, rooting for Illinois all the way. That kind of comes down to just a bias, the bias of being a Midwesterner, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of excited to see kind of how that'll play out with Baylor, especially if they go up against Purdue, which is what I'm hoping.
How about you, Mike? Anything matchup wise?
I mean, I think it's funny that the committee puts Illinois and Loyola in a possible second round game, and I look forward to that happening. And while I would love for Loyola to be able to spring the upset, it's just a game that I really do want to see. And on the other side of the bracket, I'm kind of looking forward to see if Michigan State can continue on its path and maybe meet up with Alabama to get to the Elite Eight. I think that would be a fun game to watch.
So one of the teams that interests me is Iowa. They have the big, and they got guys that can shoot, and when they're on, I just think, wow, they could be unbeatable. So I'm anxious to see the Kansas-Iowa matchup, assuming Kansas gets in there and they're healthy. And I'd, love to see that Iowa-Gonzaga matchup. So that was one of them that I was looking at. And Illinois-Houston. Mike, you talked about Houston.
Yeah.
So I don't want to upset your heart, but I did go with Illinois. But that Illinois-Houston game seems to be a game that could be really fun to watch.
Houston may be the only team that can give Gonzaga a game, I think, if they get that far. Michigan might be able to give Gonzaga a game, but Gonzaga beat Illinois earlier this year, or excuse me, they beat Kansas, Auburn, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia. I mean, they've beaten everybody, and they're trying to be the first team since Indiana back in '76 to make it all the way through the tournament unbeaten. Only happened once, and that was Indiana back in '76.
You're right. Well, in our closing minutes, in our preliminary conversation, we all agreed that we would give our Final Four and pick the national champions. So, Dr. Hyland, the floor is yours. The pressure's on you to get the thing. So, walk us through your Final Four and who your national champion is.
So my quasi-scientific approach here is Iowa in the West, Purdue in the South, Yukon in the East, and Illinois in the Midwest, with it coming down to I think Illinois and Iowa, which again I'm gonna lean towards home. So
You went with Illinois.
Oh yeah, I mean I've got to. Even though Houston, they're probably gonna bring it.
Mike?
In the South, I'm going to go with Ohio State. I think they are playing better than Baylor at this time, and we'll just see if it progresses through that way. In the West, Gonzaga in a cakewalk, I think, all the way to the Final Four. In the Midwest, Illinois, I think, will beat Houston. And I think Alabama comes out of the East to win it.
Wow. And so who's your national champion?
For me, it's Gonzaga, 32-0. I don't think anybody will touch them.
Well, that's very interesting. I told you one of the matchups I wanted to see was the Iowa-Gonzaga game. I went with Iowa because I was just looking for that one upset. And I know there's others that could be there. And coming out of the East, I went with Michigan over Texas. I picked Michigan, even though one of their star players is hurt. I'm hoping that he gets back. But and then in the Midwest, I have Illinois beating Houston. That was a toughie.
Yeah.
And then in the South, I have Baylor against Ohio State, and with the grit that I saw yesterday, I went with the Buckeyes. So that's my Final Four, and my national championship is, Mike, I'm sorry, but I agree with the doctor. I went with Illinois as the national champion.
I mean, they've got all the pieces in place without question, and there's going to be unbelievable pressure on Gonzaga in the championship game, trying to be undefeated. But I mean, they are phenomenal. They are just and Aaron Cook, who played at SIU for 3 years, is one of the first guys off the bench for Gonzaga. He's had a great year for the Zags, and it would be neat to see a former Saluki win a national championship.
Well, as we wrap up this session, First of all, let me begin by saying thank you to both of you for giving us some of your time. Again, I go back to talking about the rationale of what both of you stood for, and both of you were true to your word and where you went. But it was interesting to hear Dr. Hyland just, some of the thoughts and the processes that that we all go through in making these selections. And Mike, just hearing you, the depth of insight you have to conference play and the teams is really appreciative. And I thank you both. And since I would say the vast majority of the people watching this today are Saluki fans, Mike, unfortunately our team is not in this tournament. But if you could just maybe, as we close out, give us an idea of what we have to look forward to for next year.
Well, if everybody comes back healthy, of course, we lost Damask and Lance Jones. Damask only played like 6 or 7 games of the Missouri Valley Conference, and then Lance Jones went out in the semifinal game at the Missouri Valley Conference, or in the first round game of the Missouri Valley Conference tournament. And J.D. Mula, who was going to be the starting center, a 6'8" junior college prospect who was in the top 5 of junior college centers coming into the program, all of them will be back next year. And then Brian put in one of the best recruiting classes in maybe the last 15 years coming in as freshmen. So I think the future is nothing but bright for Coach Mullins and the program. They showed unbelievable grit when they almost beat Loyola twice at Loyola, came up short both times, and then succumbed in the quarterfinal, or in the quarterfinal game of the Valley tournament last week against Loyola. But I think the future is really, really bright for the Saluki basketball team.
Well, with any luck, we'll get past COVID, and Saluki fans will be able to get back into the arena and watch our teams. And right now we're just hanging on. Our football team is doing well. Women's softball, men's baseball. Unfortunately, we all can't get out to see these teams too. But hopefully, COVID we're certainly making progress with this, and with any luck in the fall, we'll get back to some sort of way life used to be. I don't think we'll ever go back to the way it used to be, completely the way it used to be. But again, for all of you Salukis, I want to thank you for tuning in. I hope we made you smile a little bit. We made you think a little bit. And I hope everybody enjoys watching the NCAA tournament. But Dr. Hyland, again, thank you. Mike True, thank you so much. And as always, we'll sign off by saying, go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.